Um, Great. Well, my name is Larkin. I'm the Director of Missions and Outreach here at Belmont. Hopefully you've seen a little bit about this trip or have been interested in some capacity. I know some of you all in the room have already applied for our Israel trip. I want to talk a little bit about kind of Belmont on Mission as a whole, as well as the trip itself and some of the things that we'll be doing. I'm going to be leading this trip alongside my wife, Virginia, and Dave Jager back there. Raise your hand, Dave. He's one of our university therapists. Is that your title, university therapist?
I'm a marriage and family therapist.
Marriage and family therapist. We're Belmont. He's great. And so if you have any questions, kind of stick them in your mind, and I'll kind of stop a few times for questions, and we'll have a little bit more time for questions at the end as well. So we'll talk a little bit about Belmont on Mission as a whole. Come on in. And just some of the goals of what this program is. Maybe, what comes to mind when you think of like a mission trip. You're like, what are we doing in a mission trip? Is this an Israel tour? How does this all work? So I want to talk a little bit about mission and mission trips, and then kind of how this Israel trip fits into that vision. And so our Belmont on Mission program is really built to do three things for students. One, to develop a broader understanding of God's global activity, to participate in long-term and sustainable practices and meeting needs of our global neighbors, and then to discover where you fit into God's mission of redeeming and restoring the world. And so this is just like a really broad understanding of what God is doing in the world. Like, God is active everywhere is what we believe. And anytime we're kind of going and learning and participating and kind of a part of that, we're participating in mission. And that doesn't always look like kind of the typical, maybe stereotypical mission trips that we think of, where it's like we go to a third world country and we maybe serve children in some capacity. Maybe that's one way that a mission trip can look like, but what I would believe is that anytime even we're just going to learn or be in solidarity with or kind of understand more fully what God is up to in a place, and then how we can learn about that place and kind of learn what God's up to there, and use that experience to then go back to our own lives and more fully live out God's mission. That's part of mission, right? That's part of engaging with God in the world. And so that's kind of how we see mission. And so when we say this is a Belmont on Mission trip, even though this trip specifically, and we'll talk more about this, is not maybe that classic, more project-based type of mission experience that you may have been used to or heard of or been on before, we still see this as deeply embedded in God's mission and what God is up to in the world and how we can learn and participate more fully with God. So that's kind of the broader vision of Belmont on Mission. And this is really kind of the question I'm wanting to help students answer with our Belmont on Mission program. What's my place in God's mission in the world? What is God up to? What's God doing? What's God's mission? And where do I fit into that? And I think that's a lot of students are kind of asking that question. It's like, where do I sort of fit in all the things that are going on in the world? And what's my place and all that. So hopefully a trip like this can help you experience some new things, experience your worldview some, have some new and exciting ways to kind of engage your faith, and then to use that to further reflect back on your place and what God's doing. So that's kind of the big idea. As far as like the trips that we have spring break and summer international trips. We have service trips that are more project-based, like I mentioned, as well as immersion-based trips. They're just more about learning and immersing yourself in a local culture. We have partnerships all across campus to do this. And so this trip that we're talking about today is kind of more this summer trip that's pretty immersive. It's an immersion trip where it's really about immersing yourself in a culture, immersing yourself in a history, kind of engaging your faith in a deep way, and then kind of reflecting back on how that's a part of what God's doing in your own life and all across the world. So, to Israel. Let's talk about Israel. I'm going to go over some background and information about Israel, the country itself. Just kind of tell you a little bit about Israel and the history of it and kind of where we are today. I'm not going to go super in depth, but just to give you a little bit of context, I'll talk about a little bit of this trip specifically with our host partner, which is called Passages, and kind of what the process is like with all of that and their organization. And we're going to talk about a sample itinerary, which you have, and then we'll do some questions. So that's kind of the goal. And depending on how many questions y'all have, or if y'all want to keep talking, we might go up to the full time of the combo hour. We'll get for sure out 10 minutes to the hour, but if we finish early, that's okay too. So this is Israel. If you've never seen it before, you have like Egypt down here, and like Palestine and Jordan and on the other side, Mediterranean Sea up here. If you've never kind of thought about, what Israel looks like and kind of where it is, this is where it is in the Mediterranean. And the white parts you see are what we would call Israel, and then the red parts are not under Israeli control, they're under Palestinian control. But it wasn't always this way, right? If you know anything about the Middle East, there's been a lot of conflict and a lot of war and a lot of change of borders and powers. And so, before World War II, the land of Palestine was inhabited by Palestinian Arabs that had lived there for a long time, thousands of years. And after World War II, obviously with the Holocaust, the atrocities there, the UN gave the Jewish people 55% of Palestine and called it Israel. And so they kind of broke it down and said, we're going to give you these portions of this land, basically in response to some of the obvious genocide and challenges that those people faced. There was a war in 1948 where Israel fought for more of what they thought was already theirs, and then another 7-day war in 1967 where there's been changing of borders. And so this is kind of what it's looked, sorry for the quality on this, but this is kind of what it looked like. This is all Palestine pre-World War II, 1946. Then after the UN made their decision, you can kind of see Israel gets this portion, but a large portion near Israel, and then a large portion just surrounding Jerusalem was still Palestine. And then after 1948, you can see those borders get smaller. And then there's an additional war in 1967 where even these borders kind of come in even more. And the West Bank, which is Palestinian controlled, is even smaller. And so you can kind of see perhaps why there's been some difficulty is both people feel like they have rights to this land, and it's a really challenging thing because you can kind of make an interesting case for both, and that's why no one has been able to figure out really what to do with this on a kind of a global scale. But this is where we'll be going, and this is kind of the context into which people go when they go and visit Israel. There's a history where there's people that have been living all over this country who have had their land given to someone else, and then also people who have experienced great atrocities that have said, we deserve a country, and this is a safe place for us to exist. And so there's a lot of questions like that we'll be engaging on the trip. Any questions about kind of the history? I'm just going to kind of keep going, but I'm not going to do a whole lot more about that. I want to give you a little bit of an overview of Passages. And so Passages is an organization, it's a subsidiary of an organization called the Philos Project. And their goal is basically to educate Christian college students about the land of Israel and give them an opportunity to both explore the spiritual heritage of the place, but also to understand the modern conflict and how they can be informed citizens of kind of both sides of the conflict. And so there have been some donors that have said we really want this to be an emphasis for young college students in America to understand what's going on. And so they've subsidized it pretty heavily, as you can know by the cost. And so I'll show a video real quick of, maybe you've already watched this video online, where they just kind of talk about the trip and some of the aspects of the trip, as well as you'll be able to see some of the different sites that are visited.
There is no.
Sorry.
For Christian
Oh, that's the
college
pivot.
students, there is.
Gotcha. Let's move this. Fifth time's the charm. Here we go.
For a Christian college student, there is nothing that can replace visiting the land of Israel. Whether you're interested in your faith, or whether you're interested in the world, and conflict, and war and peace, and what's going on, This land is a microcosm of all of it.
This is a program for Christian college students with leadership potential. It's a great way to be able to connect with the biblical roots of your Christian faith, a great way to be able to walk in the footsteps of the patriarchs, of King David, of the prophets, of Jesus and the disciples. It's also a great way to be able to walk in the footsteps of the people that live in this land today, to connect with and encounter the modern miracle that is Israel, and be able to see really issues that affect Israel and the Middle East today.
There's a difference between hearing about something and seeing it for yourself. Reading about something and actually walking at the place that it occurred.
It feels amazing to walk in the footsteps of Jesus because it's like they're real people. I get to see these major biblical characters like David and Solomon, all of these people who have shaped my faith, and they're not these big giants in the Bible, they're people like you and me.
I think Passages has a powerful role to play in my generation and younger being able to relate to the Middle East, understand, and actually just be empathetic.
Our generation is very cognitive. We want to know why about everything. And so being able to have the Bible come to life and really see that these are real places, that these are real people.
I knew that this couldn't be it. This couldn't be the end of my story with Israel. This couldn't be the end of the chapter. And I had heard about Passages Now and opportunities to stay involved.
The Passages trip is 3 parts. There's the pre-trip, which is a small course, a bunch of videos, some articles. There's the trip itself, where you come to Israel, you have these experiences. Then there's the post-trip. So you return home, and you have a whole host of options for things to go through to really reinforce your experiences here.
It's like a fire hydrant. There's so much quantity of information, and it's very tempting when you go home to kind of put everything on people. And I think that Passages Now creates an opportunity to start to process by going less is more.
I would say definitely come to anybody who's wanting to come on this trip. It's not a trip that comes along very often.
If we don't have leaders going into all other spectrums of life, the Passages ultimately, its goal is not successful. We want to build leaders throughout the United States, not just travelers, but leaders.
It's really important to be able to interact with these people and to kind of see the story from the inside.
For Christians who want to learn, who want to understand the world and what's going on in it, they need to come here, and that's what this program is all about.
Your registration fee will cover international airfare to Israel, lodging in Israel, transportation while you're here, entrance to the sites, most of your meals, and we'll be excited to welcome you to an elite alumni community after the trip, with a lot of opportunities to continue your Israel journey after you get back. This experience, coming to Israel, discovering the roots of your Christian faith in the land where your faith was born, encountering a new culture, meeting new people, I promise you that this will be an experience that you won't forget for the rest of your life.
So hopefully that gets you a little bit excited if you're interested in the trip. I actually went on this trip as a graduate student when I was doing my master's in divinity at Lipscomb University, and went through this whole program, and it's really, really an incredible experience. And so I'll speak a little bit from my own experience as well as kind of give you some of the things that they offer as well. So Passages is an immersive educational experience. There's not any kind of service projects or anything like that on this trip. It's all about kind of immersing yourself in the local culture, in the history of the place, as well as the modern conflict and some of the conversations around that. You'll have biblical theme days, so there's a lot of, there's kind of a dual purpose where there's a focus on the biblical history of the place, and then there's kind of modern Israel theme days where you're kind of looking at the modern state and place of Israel, kind of the challenges there. And then there's a whole series of lectures on the modern conflict in the Middle East, and I'll talk about that. in a few minutes. A few quick facts. So the average cost for an all-inclusive tour of Israel is at least $4,000 plus international airfare. After going on this trip, I would probably say the trip to Israel that Passages offered is probably closer to $5,000 or $6,000. And like we've said, this Passages trip cost $955. So this is an $880 payment to Passages, and then a $75 payment to Belmont as an administrative fee. And so $955 is the total cost of this trip. And so this is a huge opportunity, subsidized by the Passages program, so that people can go without the cost barrier there. And this fee, $955, covers everything except domestic airfare to New York and a couple meals. And so what that means is you pay this $955, and that covers everything for you from the time you leave for your international flight. And so usually the domestic gateway, they call the gateway city to fly out of, is either Washington, D.C. or New York. And so you're responsible for getting there on your own dime, and then after that, it's an all-inclusive trip apart from like 1 or 2 meals on the trip. And then after completing the post-trip, they call it the post-trip Passages Now. After completing that program within 45 days, you can get a $200 refund for completing that. So really, let's say your domestic flight is around $200 or $300. It really comes out to being, you can probably expect to be all in for this trip for $1,000, or maybe a little less, depending on what your domestic airfare is. So that's kind of how we talk about it. This is a trip to Israel for 10 days for less than $1,000, if you complete this kind of post-trip engagement experience, which is really great, and I'll talk about that as well. Dates of the trip, the 17th of May through the 27th of May, and so that means you'll need to be in that gateway city on that day, and they'll give you a time frame. They have a specific travel agent that we have to use to go through them, just so that they know everybody's in the right place at the right time. It's super easy to use. Who can go? So what are sort of the trip requirements? This is specifically focused on undergraduate and graduate Christian leaders. That's kind of how they talk about it. So you must be enrolled as a full-time student or enrolled within 3 months of the trip departure. So if you graduate in May, you can still go. But if you graduate in December, then that's going to be too long of a time in between. So as long as you graduate in May or later, then you'll be able to go on this trip. They ask that everyone identify as a practicing Christian. That's just kind of their focus of this trip. This organization has said, hey, this is for undergraduate and graduate Christian leaders on college campuses. And so that's one of their requirements. That's not something that Belmont has put into place. Because on many of our trips, of our other Belmont on Mission trips, you don't have to identify as a Christian to be able to go on those trips. This one, that our host partner requires that. They really ask and encourage campus and or church leadership experience in some capacity. And so, there's a few different ways that the application process will happen. The first process is you'll apply to Belmont, and basically I will sort through those applications and kind of determine, based on these qualifications, hey, I think this is a good fit, and then I'll recommend to Passages, these are my students that I want to take, and they're just going to do a double check and an additional application that's going to kind of on their end to kind of do some of their own due diligence. And then for the most part, if you're accepted to Belmont, unless there's a huge red flag, you'll be on the trip. And so you don't really have to worry about that second application being something that will deny you unless you lied on your first application, or there's some huge red flag that we didn't catch. In regards to campus and church leadership experience, it's kind of looking about what church do you attend? Do you go to a Bible study? Have you been involved with your church at all? On campus, do you have any leadership experience, or any? Are you involved with a faith development organization? Have you gone on a trip before? Those kind of things. And so just whenever you apply, both to Belmont and to the Passages, that second application, just include as much of that as possible, because that's kind of something that they look for. But again, if we accept you to the trip via Belmont, there's a 99.9% chance everything's going to be fine. And then you have to have a verified passport through the end of 2020. So not just through the end of the trip, but through the end of 2020. So double check your passport. That is a requirement to be accepted by Passages. And so if you don't have that when you apply, they won't accept you. So it's not something where it's like, oh, I'll get to that when I get to it. If you don't have a passport to the end of 2020, go ahead and do that. Any questions on kind of trip requirements or the qualifications? Yeah.
When are applications due?
Applications are due. I think I have that on a future slide. Applications are due November 29th to Belmont, and so you got about another 5 weeks or so. But the trip is filling up very quickly, and so we've already had, it's probably about 85% of the applications have come in already. So it may make it to that November 29th number. If you apply after we have accepted a full team, then you'll go on a wait list for people that back out or for some reason can't go. And then this last thing, booking your domestic travel through Traveling, that's the other thing. Any other questions? Yeah.
When will you find out?
So if the application is on a rolling admission, and what that means is as you apply, we're going to be looking at the applications and then accepting people kind of as we go instead of all in one date. And so we're going to start that probably beginning of November, starting to do some of that rolling admission. And so you'll know if you've already applied in the next few weeks if you're accepted. And then depending on how many people have applied, you'll either be kind of on a wait list or that kind of thing. And then the Passages application goes into effect early December, and then they do their acceptance letter in early January. And so, but you'll know on the Belmont end way before that. Other questions on this? Cool. All right. Pre and post trip requirements. So the pre-trip course is a 5-hour online video course in 4 different modules. It's sort of, they have a primer on Passages, kind of about the organization, how it got started, what its focus is. They have a whole module called Discover Your Roots, which is focused on the spiritual emphasis of the trip and sort of kind of thinking and preparing yourself to experience and engage with the historical, spiritual aspects of the trip. They have one called Encounter Israel, and so it's kind of logistics and the practicals, the packing lists, that kind of thing, and they go through all the details there. And then they have a module called Tell Your Story, which will set you up for the post-trip, which is called Passages now, the post-trip program, where you basically kind of just learn how to tell your story and complete various items, and then you can receive that $200 refund. And so it's the type of stuff where it's like, you have 7 options. You can speak at an event, you can do a video, like a video recap, you can do a photo journal, you can do a blog. There's 5 or 6, 7 different storytelling opportunities, and they say, when I did it, they said, choose 2 out of these 7 and complete these within 45 days, and then submit them back to Passages, and then once you've done that and they approve it, then you get the refund back. And so it's just kind of a way that they incentivize people to engage their friend group, the people around them, to tell their story and to share their experience in a significant way. And so this is kind of like the pre and post trip requirements on the trip. We'll also have a few group meetings kind of throughout the spring semester to just kind of get to know everybody. We'll have some dinners, we'll kind of go out and do some things together, and also talk about some of the things that you're learning in these modules as well. And so there will be the online course pre-trip, and then there will be a few pre-trip meetings that we'll schedule for everyone to visit or to attend as well. Any questions about pre and post trip? Cool. All right, if you didn't get an itinerary, you can scan this real quick with your camera app and kind of go through it a little bit. I printed off hopefully enough, or you can share it with a neighbor if you'd like to. And a couple quick words about the itinerary. This is a sample itinerary, and if you know anything about the Middle East, it can kind of fluctuate in its volatility and in its access to things based on kind of what's happening on a day-to-day basis or even like an hour-by-hour basis at times. And so we'll hold all of these things loosely. Some of them are for sure going to happen. Some of them are kind of like, we hope to be able to do this, but we might not be able to. For example, like visiting Bethlehem and like going into Palestine is kind of like a week-by-week thing. It's like, where are we at on that week, and are we going to be able to go there? And so we'll talk about some of these things, and sometimes the schedule changes, and they just have to adjust. So don't get too excited about every single thing, but like we'll be able to do 90% of these things for sure. So the first thing I was going to talk about is Jaffa and Nazareth. This is kind of they talk about a taste on the itinerary. This is kind of the first thing. Jaffa is the place in the Bible where Jonah lived, and so there's a lot of kind of history there. It's really beautiful, kind of Mediterranean location, so you get to explore Jaffa, look at some of the historical places in Jaffa. Then you get to go to Nazareth, both the new city of Nazareth as well as the old city, and so there's you get to tour Nazareth, kind of see all the different historical sites there, as well as they have this this place in Nazareth that is basically built to be like it would have been in the first century. And so there's this little enclosed part of the city that everyone still makes everything by hand and colors all the dyes and like makes all their food, and like it's a full-on first century experience, which is pretty cool. And then after that, you get to go to what's called Mount Precipice. This is a picture I took. And it's this, basically this kind of hill, this high mountain that overlooks this huge plain. And from here, you can like see like 5 or 6 different sites of biblical events that happen in the Old Testament and the New Testament, which is pretty cool. Like you can see a hill where like Saul did something, and then there's a thing where this army battled that army, and you can kind of look through and find some of the different stories. And so this is a really cool thing. We'll do a devotional up there, read some stories. Our tour guide will talk through all of that. So that's kind of a cool experience as well. So that's kind of the first thing on the schedule, Jaffa and Nazareth, kind of an old look at some of those things. And then there's a whole experience on the ministry of Jesus. And so this is Magdala, Church of St. Peter, Mount of Beatitudes, Capernaum, Sea of Galilee. And so this is kind of all surrounding the Sea of Galilee. There's a lot of stuff here, a lot of stuff from the Gospels, a lot of stuff from even before. Some of the places where they say, okay, this might have been where Jesus gave sermons like the Sermon on the Mount or the Beatitudes. And so, you'll see places like this where you get to kind of go and do some devotional time and see some of the places where a lot of these places are where churches, kind of had these sites that were really special, and so they would build a church on top of it. And then, throughout the generations and centuries, those things have changed. You kind of get to see the historical evolution. Especially like Capernaum, there's like 5 different civilization churches that have been built and then torn down and built and torn down. So you kind of get to see a really cool historical explanation there. And then one of the coolest things is you get to take a boat out on the Sea of Galilee and do dinner out on the river or on the sea and eat and kind of go out. They play worship music and kind of do some cool things there. And so the Sea of Galilee is a really cool experience as well. So it's kind of the ministry of Jesus. You do stuff all around the Sea of Galilee, which is super fun. There's a whole part of the trip that's sort of focused on the neighbors of Israel. And so you go up to the Golan Heights, which is in the north part of Israel. You maybe saw on that first map up at the top was Golan Heights. This is where you can see 3 of Israel's bordering countries, Syria and Jordan, and so you'll talk to some of the UN and officers that are stationed there, that kind of try and manage some of the conflict and the difficulties with that kind of the cross section of borders right there. Really fascinating experience. You'll be able to maybe visit the West Bank, not actually go into the West Bank. Obviously, this is the Palestinian-controlled places where Bethlehem is, and so we may or may not be able to actually go into the West Bank, but this is what we see the border. And then the Gaza Strip, we definitely won't go into the Gaza Strip. This is kind of a hot zone a lot of the time, but we'll kind of approach the border and be able to see how people live and the different effects of the conflicts there. So there's a whole part of this is focused on kind of the neighbors of Israel. There's a large section of the trip, a couple days, focused on Jerusalem. And so, visiting the old city of David, the southern wall, the city wall of Hezekiah. So one of the coolest things about Jerusalem is that it's been there for thousands of years, right? And so there's old cities of the first kings and people that lived there, like Hezekiah, that built walls, and there's different times where different walls and historical things existed, and so you can kind of see the evolution of the city itself, and then this whole modern thing placed on top of it. And so it's just a fascinating look at just thousands of years of history, even just walking down the road. It's that rock is from 20 years ago, that one next to it is from 2,000 years ago. And it's just kind of a crazy juxtaposition of the historical places there. And then we'll do Sabbath at the Western Wall, and so we'll visit the Western Wall, be able to kind of see people take their prayers and stick it in between the cracks in the wall, and it's a really incredible experience. We'll go on Sabbath, and so there will be a big celebration. All the Orthodox Jewish people will come in and kind of do a big thing, and then you'll have a Shabbat dinner with a Jewish family somewhere in Jerusalem, and that'll be a really cool experience as well. So that's kind of the Jerusalem. There's some new archaeology that's going on there that they found kind of some new burial chambers and things. That's really exciting, as well as there's like this old tunnel that goes from inside where Hezekiah's chambers were all the way like the outside of the city, and it's this little bitty tunnel that's like this wide, and it's filled with water up to like up to your thighs, and if you want to, you can like go all the way out, and it's like an escape tunnel that they used to use, and so you can like walk all the way through it. It takes like 30 minutes, and it's really fun. So there's just like lots of cool stuff like that, where just things that are found in the scripture, as well as just these historical sites that they found, they get to experience and see in Jerusalem. This is a long day. It's kind of one of those like 25,000 step days where you're just like on your feet all day going. And real quick on that, this is a pretty high demand trip physically. So if you have problems walking or any physical disabilities in any way, that would be something serious to consider in your engagement with the trip. We would love for you to be able to go, but you have to be really able to walk a lot. And so that would be just something to consider as you're thinking about the trip. There's a lot of cool stuff in the desert. My favorite place in Israel is Masada. This is from the top of Masada, kind of looking down, but Masada is this hill, like this mountaintop plateau on the top of this mountain. Obviously, you have to take one of those like train cars that's on cables up there, and it's basically this city that these Jewish people built as kind of a last bastion of defense against some of the invasion in early 1st century Rome. And there's all these stories about how Rome came in and conquered the city and how they got up, and it's just a fascinating place. And so you can see for miles and miles, obviously, and the Dead Sea is back in the distance there. So this is just such a cool experience as well, doing the Dead Sea. You saw some people in that video with the Dead Sea mud on their face, and you get to go float in the Dead Sea, and that's a pretty cool, just crazy experience. If you've never been to a really salty body of water, you can just float because there's so much salt in the water. But you don't want to get in your eyes because that would be a bad day. So there's just a lot of fun kind of things in the desert as well. So we'll do that. Then there's a whole experience on the modern state of Israel in Tel Aviv. And so we'll visit the Holocaust Museum in Israel, and this perhaps was the thing that impacted me most coming back, just the experience at this museum. It's one thing going to the National Museum of the Holocaust in DC. It's totally different to do that in the Jewish state of Israel. Like kind of their people telling their story and their experience. And so it's kind of a few hours in this museum, obviously really heavy, but extremely enlightening. And so we'll do that. We'll visit the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, kind of see how their parliament runs, how their democracy runs. We can talk to some of their leaders, which is really exciting. And then discussions with IDF forces, so the Israeli Defense Force. Everyone in Israel is required to be in the IDF, men and women at some point, so they all have to go through it, and so we'll get to sit down with people that have been in the IDF or currently are in the IDF and kind of their experience of that. And then we'll do Caesarea Philippi, and there's a whole section on Tel Aviv startup culture. So Tel Aviv has more startups and innovation than anywhere in the world. Like they develop more technology in just this one little city than like all of China. Like it's just a really crazy thing that they are able to do. So kind of see some of the experiences there that talk about how they do that and some of the different ways that they've figured out how to be innovative in their country. One of the questions a lot of people ask is this a fair and balanced trip? And so if you have read or have been kind of on the beat on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, there's kind of a lot of different ways you can approach it. And sometimes that is sort of a partisan thing based on our own political parties, but a lot of people are like, is this going to be a fair look? Are we just going to get the Israeli side? Are we just going to kind of be seeing, propaganda. And one of the things that Passages is pretty clear about is that they want to create advocates for Israel. And so when I went into this trip, I was kind of like nervous about that. I was like, you're going to try and kind of whitewash all of this and not show me the bad side of what's going on here, because I had done some of my own research. And what I found is that they were extremely like even-handed about everything. They say, we want people to be advocates for Israel, but we're not going to do that through just giving you one side of the story. We're going to give you all the facts and then let you experience this culture in this place and make the decision for yourself. So some of the ways they do that, you know, the lecture series that we went through, and this is, I would say, primarily done through the lecture series. It may seem like, oh, we got all these cool things to do in Israel. Why are we going to sit down and hear lectures? This is why. So we have people like Dr. Tal Becker, who is the principal legal advisor for the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs and was the lead negotiator of the Israeli peace negotiation team with John Kerry. So this guy for decades led the peace negotiations with Israel and Palestine from the Israeli side. And you get to like sit down and have like a Q&A with him. It's just like a really amazing opportunity that you would never really get if you're just going on a trip to Israel with some friends or family or even with your church, because you have access to some of these types of people. And then on the other side, you have a guy named Nadal Fouquet, who's the Director General of the Palestinian Peace Coalition. And so you kind of got both sides of how they're both trying to, you know, share their own story and share their own perspectives. You get to talk to members of the Knesset. There was a journalist from the New York Times who focused on the atrocities that the Palestinian people are experiencing. You get to have dinner with IDF soldiers, like I mentioned, CEOs of startups, pastors of Arab Christian churches. There's a lot of kind of lectures and people that you meet that you'll be able to kind of hear their perspective. And one of the things that, you know, I would commit to you on the trip, if you're kind of worried about that at all, is that you're probably going to get some people who believe really strongly on one side of the kind of conversation, and that's okay. We're going to talk about that, but we're not going to listen to any voices in isolation. We're going to kind of see the full picture of what we're trying to experience there. So, all right, next steps. I don't know if this QR code works. I just copied it over from another slide. I think we may have fixed it, but you can apply at global.belma.edu. Deadline is November 29th, but spots are limited, so I would apply soon. Questions or thoughts or anything? Yeah.
Has anything dangerous ever happened during the trip that has affected things negatively?
Things happen in Israel that we would say are dangerous, if that makes sense. Like, but we also live in a kind of a day, like we have like school shootings all the time. We're like, oh, that's kind of a normal thing. It's kind of the same thing over there where they're like, oh yeah, like Gaza tried to shoot a bomb over here or a missile over here and we shot it down. Like it's just kind of a normal thing for them. And so there are things that will be monitored. One of the things that Passages has never done is like canceled a trip or put anybody in danger. They've never had any problems. And they send like 2,000 people a year via their program. And so the group will be safe. There might be some things, I mean, I can't guarantee, literally no one can guarantee anything about like what or will not happen. If it will affect the trip, there might be things that affect the trip. You know, it's like the week before we go, if there's a rise in tension in the Gaza Strip, we might not go visit kind of that border. We might go do something else that day. So they have had those type of things happen, but the group's never been in danger or anything like that. Other questions? Yeah, Luke.
I saw you said New York up there for like flights.
Yeah.
Is that like, do you have to fly over there or is it just?
Yeah, so the gateway city is like the international gateway city, so everyone will be on the same plane leaving internationally from the same domestic location and airport, and we all have to be there. And so everyone getting there is up to them. They have to go through Travelland, but it's a pretty easy process, and they get you all there at the right time to make sure you're kind of there with the group. But if you're like, if you want to drive there, you can just drive, like, you just have to be there at the right time. And so I know you live in Boston, so like you could get there however you want to get there, as long as you're at the right airport at the right time.
I was gonna say something from Connecticut, so I have to come to Nashville first.
No, yeah. So you just have to get to New York, whatever the gateway city, DC or New York or whatever it is. It ends up
Do you
being.
think it'll be DC or New York, or?
It's almost always Dulles, JFK, or it's usually one of those two. There's one more that it sometimes is, but it's always kind of like northeastern.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Yes.
For like the dates when it says like May 17th seventeenth to May 27th. It has like a 10-day itinerary. So like, is one of those days flying? Like it'll go to like the 28th of like flying.
So those are departure and arrival dates, and so we'll get there and then have probably 9 days in country, just how the time changes works, and then that last day will be travel. And so those dates are the departure and arrival dates from. Yes. Yeah.
So just to clarify, so we're flying to New York, and Passages is like paying for the flight from New York to Israel.
Yes. So your domestic airfare, and we think it's going to be New York. It might be Washington D.C. And so you're responsible for getting to that gateway city, and then from there on, the international flight and everything else is covered.
So I assume it's not from New York a one-way trip. Is it tend to be one city that you stop at on the way, / how long does it end up being from New York to Israel?
Went through Amsterdam last time. It's a pretty common route to go, kind of through Amsterdam and then down. It's a pretty long trip. I'm trying to remember. That's a good question.
Amsterdam's like 7-8 hours, and then
I think it was like 18 hours total, maybe something like that. What was your question, Dave? Did you have one?
oh no, I was just saying that the Amsterdam flight from New York is like 8 hours
Okay,
plus
yeah.
layover stuff. So yeah, pretty far.
How do we travel in country?
On a charter bus, and so we'll have a charter bus. We're going to take a group from Belmont of 40, so a pretty big group, and so we're traveling by charter bus all over no flying or anything within country, and a lot of walking. So, and we'll also have what they call Passages Fellows, and these are two basically young folks that have been on Passages before, who went through a whole leadership fellow program, and then now they're kind of on the trip as well. And so you'll have the 3 Belmont adult leaders, and then you'll have 2 Passages fellows that will do some debrief and kind of steward the trip as well. So it'll be kind of 5 total leaders on the group with 40 of us.
So I actually have my grandmother lives in Tel Aviv.
Yeah.
Would there be like free time where I would like go to her house? I don't know how that.
There is like a guided free time tour in Tel Aviv at one point. You'd have to wait until the schedule comes out and kind of look at, if there is some free time. And so if that fits in with kind of what the free time where it's like, hey, go explore for a little while, like, I don't see why not. Yes.
Are other schools like coming with Passages, or is it just Belmont?
Passages sends like 2,000 college students, 2,000 or 3,000 college students a year, and we'll be the only one on this bus. There will be a whole group of Passages teams there at the same time, and so they rotate the schedule and stagger the schedule so we're not all in the same place. But there will be other college teams there as well.
What will our like accommodations be like? Where will we be staying?
Almost all hotels. It's all kind of like really nice accommodations. It's not it's not bad. There's one place on the Sea of Galilee that's like right on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. That's sort of like a kind of an Airbnb vibe. That's just kind of like a mid-range hotel vibe. But everything is nice accommodations.
So not like hostels.
Not at all. Not at all. Yeah, the hotel you stay in Tel Aviv is awesome. So that's pretty cool. Yeah.
So with as far as the admissions process, I'm trying to figure out. So the way you described it is, if you're within the first 40 to apply, you're almost guaranteed a spot as far as if you qualify the basic things, and then after the 40, it's kind of waiting for someone else to get their spot or something come up like that.
Yeah, we probably won't start accepting applications and like approving people onto the trip until we have that full amount. But it's kind of, if you like meet the qualifications and we feel like you're a good fit, then you'll kind of get accepted on a rolling basis. For example, we'll probably prioritize a senior who has a lot of church and campus leader experience and is really interested and has a great application response than a freshman that's like, I want to go to Israel. That sounds fun. I've never led anything in my life, and I've never been out of the country. We might end up accepting that person, but there will be priority placed on those that have more campus leader or church leadership experience, more involved, or more kind of the application process. We'll take that into account. But yeah, that's right. So we'll start accepting once we hit that 40. It'll be on a waiting list basis, rotating in people that have applied based on their application.
Will this trip be offered other years?
that's the plan. It may not be these dates. Sometimes it might like be a little bit later or a little bit earlier. But the plan is to do this every year. Yeah. We get like 2 more questions if people have them. Or not. Cool. All right. So I'm leading the trip. So my email, larkin.briley@belmont.edu. Feel free to email me if you have questions. And then apply online, global.belmont.edu. I hope you can come. And then if you want a Belmont Revision sticker, I will set this up here on the table.